Hi, and welcome to another edition of Jacobin Talks. I am your host for today, Nando Vila, and I am joined by two guests to discuss the ongoing situation in Ecuador. Denis Rogatyuk is the international editor for Jacobin América Latina, and David Adler is a director at the Progressive International. Guys, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Nando. Thanks.
Where are you guys in the world right now?
I am in Quito, still in Ecuador. I'm still in Ecuador.
Still in Ecuador, David, how about you?
Undisclosed location, Nando, but
In the bunker?
but
Okay.
in the bunker, but outside of Ecuador, since I was there last week.
Nice. So maybe, Dennis, I'll start with you. Can you just explain what is happening in Ecuador, just in broad strokes? What are the basics?
Well, the basics are the follows, Nando. As in, the situation actually still remains unclear here with regards to which faction of this anti-Correa movement is actually going to face off against the eventual challenger Andrés Arauz. As these days that I've been here and I've been witnessing what's been happening is number one. There was sort of a preliminary agreement that was reached between two major candidates of the right here. So one is Guillermo Lasso, who represents the traditional conservative movement in Ecuador, and is one of the country's most notorious corporate bankers. He's also been one of the leading opposition figures and critics of Rafael Correa, and he also stood against Correa and against candidates of Correa twice in the past. So this is actually his third election. And on the other hand side is a candidate named Carlos Jakub Perez, who has been supported by the so-called indigenous party called Pachakutik, and is also backed by the CONAI, the Confederation of the Indigenous Organizations of Ecuador. Now, these last several days, as I said, have been dominated by this conflict between the two candidates as to who would be the best to confront Andrés Arauz, who is seen as the successor of Rafael Correa, who was the minister in Correa's government, who has also worked very extensively in the Center for Economic Policy and Research in Washington, this left-wing think tank there as well, and who is seen as kind of not just a breath of fresh air, but also a caterer of the citizens' revolution, and someone who can, on one hand side, reclaim the legacy of Correa, of the citizens' revolution, but also push forward with fresh energy and with fresh proposals.
Right. So just so people understand, Rafael Correa was president for many years of Ecuador. He was kind of in the sort of left-wing mold of Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, Lula da Silva in Brazil, and then when he went away, he was replaced by Lenin Moreno, who was from the same party. Correct me if I'm wrong, but who has not sort of continued with that tradition and has become very unpopular. And now there's a new round of elections in which another candidate from the same party has sort of gotten the most votes, but there are two challengers to him, and there's going to be another round of elections. David, can you explain kind of the broader context of this election and how it fits in kind of in the grand scheme of Latin American politics?
Sorry, no, yeah. just want before we go, just slight correction. Is that the
go ahead? Because I don't know anything, so correct me all the time.
We call it, the movement which is supporting Andrés Arauz and supporting the Citizens' Revolution, supporting Correa, is called the Union for Hope, which consists of the Democratic Center party. The party that was previously led by Correa and supported by Lenin Moreno, Country Alliance or Alianza País, has basically disappeared after this election.
But Nando, I think that bleeds very well into the analysis that I was going to give of what exactly Ecuador is and represents for the region and indeed for international politics more broadly, which is to say that Ecuador is and has been a laboratory for a lot of the authoritarian dynamics, as well as you might say neo-colonial financial dynamics that have dominated certainly Latin America, but across the global south over the past 3 decades. So I'll just stick with these 2 dimensions that I think are most pertinent to the discussion here. One is the international financial dimension, where under Lenin Moreno, who was the sort of the traitor of the Citizens' Revolution that came after Rafael Correa, you had a new agreement with the IMF, which has basically rammed through a series of austerity reforms in Ecuador and promises to ram through several more. Many of your listeners, viewers will remember the vibrant and very inspiring protests of October 2019, fighting against the IMF's austerity agenda. They've only since sort of ratcheted the screws. We, the Progressive International, have been trying to fight the IMF on its own terrain there in Ecuador, most recently in its push for central bank independence, the privatization of Ecuador's central bank, basically stripping the government of its ability to control monetary policy ahead of a potential progressive government coming back to power. So in that sense, Ecuador really is a kind of laboratory for a certain economic policymaking, sort of imperialist economic policymaking. Of course, we're recording this on the heels of the new Bolivian government announcing that they will be returning money to the IMF after their experience with taking out a loan. Jesus Christ. Sorry, guys. Someone's at the door, and I have to get it because it's my host.
No worries. Okay, we can move on. Denis, so explain to me what's going on with this so-called coup attempt, or what's the situation now with this recount? I mean, it seems to me that it fits in a sort of modern tradition in Latin American politics when there's sort of contested elections and international organizations like the OAS come in and say, "Oh no, that some irregularities that took place, like what happened in Bolivia last year." Can you explain what's going on now in Ecuador with that situation?
Sure. It's actually something that's which I also feel like we've seen a pattern of when we also think about what happened in the case of Bolivia in October 2019. Well, in the case of Ecuador, the Organization of the American States actually took a leading role in trying to negotiate this kind of a deal between Jakub Perez and Guillermo Lasso on as what I would say a peaceful transition towards a second round. What I mean by that is that during the meeting on February 12th that took place at the central headquarters of the Electoral Council, of Ecuador, the two opposition candidates initially agreed on conducting a full recount in the province of Guayas, where the votes of Arauz and Lasso basically were dominating. At the same time as conducting a 50% recount across 16 other provinces, and this is a deal that was basically brokered by the Organization of the American States. So they directly intervened into the way that that the second round would be decided, and this also turned out to be illegal under the Ecuadorian electoral law, as it is impossible to conduct just a full recount in a single province and a partial recount in only some provinces of the country without any specific reason whatsoever. And as such, sort of this kind of an attempt effectively broke down. The OAS also really praised the entire process, the entire electoral process here in Ecuador throughout this whole time, even though it was as David mentioned to me so many times, and he was the observer at many points, is that this was so disorganized and so chaotic, and there have been so many cases of attempting to block the candidacy of Andrés Arauz, and all these the campaign of intimidation by the media, and also by members of the National Electoral Council. So some members of the council are aligned to Guillermo Lasso, some are aligned to Pachacutic, and some are aligned to Lenin Moreno. But overall, this is not a process that to me seemed like just or clean, or that was fair to the candidacy of Andrés Arauz. And the organization of the American states played a key part in actually trying to legitimize all of this, trying to legitimize the repression and the persecution that has been endured by Andrés, by the Citizens' Revolution, by Rafael Correa, and by the left, by the real left here in Ecuador in general. So, but on the other hand side, I also believe that the OAS has, in a way, kind of learned from their experience in Bolivia, is that they, in Bolivia, they made a direct and hard intervention into the country, actually, effectively legitimizing a violent coup against Evo Morales. While in case in Ecuador, they opted for a far more subtle approach for now, as trying to basically try to calm the situation down among the anti-Correa candidates, among the anti-Correa leaders, and basically try to effectively broker some kind of a joint front among them in order to take on Andrés Arauz in the second round. But their intervention is still full on here in the country.
Right. Well, David, I'm glad that it wasn't a CIA black bag in the undisclosed location bunker that took you away. You're back and fresh. So I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that Ecuador is often been used as a sort of experiment for, things like the IMF's economic shenanigans. Why Ecuador? Why is it used as such an experimental base? I'm guessing it's not because it's in the center of the world.
Well, so before I was referring to Ecuador as a laboratory in multiple senses of the word, right? So there's the economic dimension related to the IMF's agreement, but that doesn't start there. Ecuador is a country that's been dollarized, by which I mean Ecuador literally uses the U.S. dollar as its primary currency, as its only currency, and so therefore there are those kinds of links directly to the United States. But it's a laboratory for other kinds of dynamics that are more political in origin. The plague of Latin American politics is legal warfare or lawfare, are these techniques of basically capturing and mobilizing the judiciary to criminalize opposition. And we've seen that in the coup against Dilma in 2016. We saw it we see it all the time in terms of putting activists into prison and shutting down parties. But there's almost no country that has a more comical, more lengthy legal warfare process than in Ecuador. Dennis could go on and on. We could spend an hour just talking about the unrelenting assault on the various political outfits, the various ways in which Rafael Correa in particular has had his, just to give one absurd example in the course of this campaign, to basically strip Rafael Correa of his ability to be involved in Ecuadorian politics. It was not enough to have trumped up corruption charges, right? One giant major mechanism of legal warfare that was lobbied also against people like Lula. It was not enough to say that while everyone else could send in digital signatures to run for president or vice president in his case, Rafael Correa actually had to be physically present. He was the only one who was required to be physically present. But when he was denied his ability to run for office, they stripped him of his very ability to use his voice and his face. They said it was going to be illegal to have any stencil, photo, poster, radio recording of Rafael Correa in the course of this election. And this is unprecedented. Never before have we seen, someone get stripped of their humanity in that way, right? You can throw someone in prison, but you can still stencil, a painting or an image of them. And Ecuador ends up being this incredible terrain where a lot of those tactics of legal warfare are developed or experimented and spread across the region. And I think I disagree with Dennis in this way. I mean, or I agree with his analysis, but I think there's a temptation to read the OAS as being a dominant force, as being the tip of the spear for a lot of the reactionary dynamics in Latin America. It's not true. The OAS are, like the US and the CIA in general, fundamentally opportunists. They see an opportunity, that they're happy to seize it and play an important facilitating role, legitimating role. It's what they've been doing in Ecuador. It's what they did in Bolivia as well. But it requires those domestic political entrepreneurs to basically say, what's the latest legal sort of lawfare tactic that we can cook up and throw against the wall. And in the case of these Ecuadorian elections, just in the amount of dirt that's being slung at the wall is incredible to see. Just like, what is going to stick? We don't know, but we're going to try everything.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, you mentioned the candidacy of Jakub Perez, and I want to ask you about him because he's a very curious figure, at least from afar, where I'm sitting in my home in Los Angeles, and that he kind of reads outwardly as this indigenous rights leader, kind of maybe in the mold of someone like Evo Morales, but obviously, we at Jacobin, we're like, no, we don't like him. We like the other guy. What's his deal? Like, what's going on with this guy? Explain to me what his deal is.
Yeah, well, I think that first of all, it's been quite first of all surprising, and also slightly demoralizing to actually see sections of the left across the world and United States actually first of all portraying Carlos Jakub Perez as an indigenous leader, or even trying to compare him to a figure like Evo Morales, when in fact there's absolutely nothing in common between those two. And I'll give the following reasons. First of all, Yaku, that's not his name. That is a nickname which he adopted in 2017.
Oh, so he's like the Ecuadorian Beto O'Rourke. He's pulling
exactly
he's Beto O'Rourke. He's not Latino. That dude's Irish. But Beto sounds Latino. Yeah.
That's actually probably one of the best kind of analogies that you can give with regards to the United States politics. Yes, he's basically Beto O'Rourke in some ways. But it's when we look at his profile, what we're actually seeing is that we're actually seeing a man who for almost a decade actively organized actions, protests, and other means of trying to either opposing the government of Rafael Correa, or even trying to overthrow it. And I'll just give a bit of background on Perez. He is the former leader of Aquaru Nari, which is like a small organization of affiliated to CONAI, and which claims to represent a section of the Quichua population of Ecuador, and he's also the former prefect of the Azuay province here, and it was precisely in this campaign to be a prefect that he started to call himself Jakub Perez, since this is a province which has a very large Quichua population as well. But Perez first came into prominence in Ecuador during the anti-Correa protests of 2015, where you saw like a whole range of organizations, but where you saw figures like Guillermo Lasso, like the right-wing leader Jaime Nebot, Pérez, and also some sections of CONAI basically organizing these marches against some of the proposed reforms of Correa, such as the new taxes on the super rich, a possibility of Correa's re-election, and other things. So Perez, along with his wife, who is a Brazilian French academic, Manuel Pich, have traditionally opposed the citizens' revolution and Correa to such an extent where in the election of 2017 between Guillermo Lasso and Lenin Moreno, they stated publicly that the banca was preferable to a dictatorship. saying that Correa has been a dictator throughout this whole time, or the citizens' revolution has been a dictatorial government. So he publicly backed Lasso in that campaign. And on top of that, he also supported almost every single attempted coup or lawfare campaign imaginable across the continent. So he's the one who openly backed the parliamentary coup against Dilma Rousseff in 2016. He supported the lawfare campaign against Cristina Kirchner in Argentina. He supported the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, not as directly as as Guillermo, Lasso, and others, but nevertheless. And of course, he also supported the violent coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia. He openly said that that Evo Morales committed fraud, and that the coup was legitimized, and it was and sort of as a consequence of that, last year in December last year, there was a mass gathering of indigenous leaders and organizations in Cochabamba and Bolivia, where a large number of the across indigenous leaders, so CONAIE and others, were invited to meet with Morales, meet with indigenous leaders, and the one who was specifically excluded was Carlos Perez, because of all of these stances which he took, which he never once in his life took a single stance which supported the rights of the indigenous indigenous movements or the indigenous lives here in Ecuador or across Latin America. So he has effectively been a political opportunist throughout this time, and he's I believe the same can also be said about the political organization which has backed him, Pachakutik, which also has effectively opposed the government of Rafael Correa for most of its time. It's a political movement which supported Lenin Moreno throughout most of his presidency, except for that brief period of the uprising in October 2019, and also a movement that was started by one of the harshest critics of Rafael Correa, and also right-wing figure, Fernando Villavicencio, here, who is also now been a candidate in the election here. So I really hope that the left in general, the left outside of Ecuador, doesn't have any illusions that Carlos Perez just represents another wing of the neoliberal movement here in Ecuador. Just like one. It's the movement. It's neoliberalism, dressed in ponchos. That's basically what it is.
Sounds like that old trick, using identity politics to sell neoliberalism to people. David, I want to ask, what is the economic situation in Ecuador right now in the wake of Lenin Moreno's presidency, the coronavirus, all that good stuff, and what needs to happen to improve the situation?
Well, it feels a bit important to me to go on record stating some slight disagreements with Dennis. I mean, I think that the overall description of Yaku, it feels weird that I can't see him now on the screen, but Dennis, I say this with lots of love. No, I think he was
sticking his middle finger up at you.
Yeah, I could tell. Smiling, but mooning me on the show.
Yeah,
I think So I think the description of Yaku is fair politically, and I think. I'm not particularly interested in litigating whether someone is indigenous or not, but I do think it's really important for us to get to grips with the fact that the indigenous movement in Ecuador contains this really deep tension in it. Of course, blood is thicker than water always, and I think that this goes to the question of what identity politics is and means in places where indigenous communities have been locked out of political and economic power for a long time, right? And the CONAIE, I mentioned these October 2019 protests against the IMF. Those were led by the CONAIE. I mean, these contain many of, and I think Dennis would agree with this analysis, many of the most inspiring, activist, powerful leftist representatives of the indigenous community in Ecuador, and indeed in Latin America. And I think it's critical. And I think Andrés Arauz has said as much to me and has said as much publicly, and certainly we've been hoping to see it, the formation of a kind of progressive, feminist, ecologist, and indigenous bloc, right? So I don't think that someone criticizing Rafael Correa, needing to get to grips with what exactly is going to be the new political economy that undergirds that settlement. But as we move into the second round, what's going to be the political economic vision that can undergird an indigenous, progressive, feminist, ecologist bloc for this new vision of Ecuador? Dennis was mentioning a new kind of breath of fresh air in the Correísta movement. And the reason why we need that is precisely for the reason the question you just asked, Nando, about what is the political economic conjuncture that Ecuador finds itself at. Ecuador is one of the countries that's been hit hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic of any country in the world. We think that we have it bad in the United States. Ecuador has had twice the mortality rate of the United States in the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has been a direct impact of the austerity agenda of the IMF. Between 6,000 and 10,000 public health workers dismissed in the course of the IMF's austerity arrangements in the past 3 years alone, which of course have played a huge role in the devastating impacts we've seen in places like Guayaquil of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the economic crisis there is devastating. With, of course, the little sort of policy room that an Ecuadorian government has to maneuver, that any sort of global southern country has to maneuver as capital is being evacuated of the country. And Lenin Moreno has been just stripping away some of those controls around capital and its investment to make way for FDI, that of course has never arrived. And in the mass evacuation of capital we saw in the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've just seen the few prospects for economic growth and prosperity in Ecuador really evaporate, which is why this settlement is so important. So, to bring it back to the question of Yaku and indigenous neoliberalism, this is a guy who wants to strip away the few remaining capital controls in Ecuador, which, I don't think you have to be a macroeconomist to think, well, that is really gets to the core of that political economic settlement. If Ecuador, as a dollarized economy, cannot keep money inside of its country, cannot ensure that the money that is being invested, the little money that is being invested to create jobs, to create growth, stays in the country, continues to circulate its economy, then we are in a pure neocolonial extractive moment, right? Where even the money that's coming in, thank you so much to the sort of Yankee investor that's coming in and investing in Ecuador, just gets sucked right out. Or even domestic exporters who should have a strong interest in retaining monetary sovereignty for Ecuador, so they can devalue and they can invest in local labor. They're just offshoring their money. So this is where the Yaku Lasso thing becomes so powerful. Yaku wants to strip away remaining capital controls. Lasso is the king of offshore accounts. I'm not sure if Dennis mentioned it in my absence, but Guillermo Lasso has accounts in Panama, he has accounts in Switzerland. He's like the king of, offshoring his profits as his, the head of the second biggest bank in Ecuador. So that's really what's at stake here, is a question of not just sovereignty in the broad sense, but is there going to be an economic future? And that's what someone like Andrés Arauz is really trying to articulate. Instead of this broad, instead of leaning into the blood is thicker than water politics, is really saying, well, we need to have specific solutions to many of the problems that continue to afflict this country. Andrés is the pioneer of a parallel payment system, right? This is something that people were talking about in the Southern European countries, stuck in the monetary arrangement of the euro. Equally important in a dollarized economy, stuck in the monetary arrangement of the current of a dollar. Which is to say, if you're stripped of your ability to control your monetary policy, a monetary policy that's been the savior of the eurozone, of the United States in the course of this COVID-19 pandemic, you need to create some room so that you can maneuver in terms of tax credits and fiscal space. So without going too deeply into those technical details, what this election is really about is there going to be substantive a substantive policy program on the table to guide Ecuador out of this profound political economic crisis, or are we going to somehow do this anti-corruption politics dance, basically talk about cleaning things up, which has always been cover for a right-wing agenda, across the region. And those to me feel like the stakes of the election. And I think that large parts of the indigenous movement really understand that and are prepared to create a kind of settlement if they're going to be bargaining around issues of plurinationality and education. And I think that that's something that's on the table and should be on the table. And Dennis is smiling at me. I don't know why, but I think that, I'm trying to cram in a 3-minute discussion of the political economy of dollarization, but I think that really is what's at stake here.
So yeah, Dennis, speaking about the stakes in the election, when is the next round of the election? Who's running in it? What's the latest? What is the what's the state of play in that sense?
Well, it's the final. It seems to be the final decision with regards to who's going to face off against Arauz will be decided on Monday. From the sources that I heard, is that the CNE is supposed to make the final decision next week. If not on Monday, then there's in the days following that, as the CNA recently voted against Yaku's request to do this whole recount maneuver, so basically kind of leaving him out there in the cold there. So if we assume that Guillermo Lasso is the main opposition candidate against Andrés Arauz, then the playing field becomes very clear. So this becomes basically a battle between on one hand side, the enduring legacy of the citizens' revolution, the legacy of having an economically sovereign government, a government which recovered. First of all, point that they was making, it was the government of Rafael Correa which first recovered the functions of the central bank after years and years of neoliberalism. It's a government which initiated massive programs to reduce inequality, to reduce poverty. It's a government which created a new constitution, which recognized Ecuador's plurinational character, which also initiated a program of transition from basically being a petro state into being a state with a much more diverse economy, and also an economy with green energy, as there were projects such as Coca-Cola Sinclair hydroelectric plant, one of the largest hydroelectric plants in South America as well. So this is the legacy of support for Latin American integration and sovereignty, and in defense of other revolutions and opposition to U.S. imperialism. All of that, along with other new ideas that Arauz has had in order to fix the current situation in Ecuador. One of the David mentioned some of these already, and Andrés has actually been in the country, in the United States this last couple of days, so conducting these meetings with the IMF, kind of preparing ground for the renegotiation of debt, the same way that Rafael Correa did throughout 2008, as well as meeting with the migrant communities there as well. So from what I've seen, Andrés and his campaign, I guess they kind of took a hint from some of the writings of Napoleon. Don't disturb your enemy while he's making a mistake, because that is precisely what the other opposition candidates have been doing. Is get Lasso and Pérez effectively sort of playing this game, this sort of game of political football to decide who faces off against Arauz. But all that it has resulted in is this just utter confusion and this constant inconsistency as well. So one day Pérez says that we want to construct a broad anti-Correa front and to take on Arauz in the second round. The second day he says we will absolutely not support the candidacy of Lasso and his band of delinquents, while everyone else, all other candidates stay silent. And we have to remember that he himself, Lasso, represents not just kind of the traditional conservative politics here in Ecuador, but he also represents kind of the legacy of the 1980s, and also the legacy of the economic and financial collapse of Ecuador in the period of 1998 to 2000. So this period of economic collapse, which resulted in the dollarization of Ecuador, which resulted in the mass migration of millions of Ecuadorians abroad. And he was also a minister of finance in the government of Jamil Mahuad, so the government responsible for dollarization. In the government where, at one point when he was minister, the minimum wage in Ecuador, the monthly minimum wage in Ecuador was $4. That's not $4 an hour. That's $4 a month. So this is a figure which has a lot of baggage behind him.
Yeah.
So I believe
he strikes me as He strikes me as like the cartoon villain, the banker guy with white hair, he strikes me as the cartoon villain. David, I want to ask about Eduardo Arauz as a political figure. We know Rafael Correa. He's kind of, like I said, he's more in the mold of this more traditional pink tide politician, very charismatic, very bombastic. Capable of really sticking his finger at the bad guys when he wants to. Kind of Arauz strikes me as a very different figure. Stylistically, I mean, they may have the same kind of political program or similar political program, but stylistically just couldn't be more different. Could you describe him and who he is?
Sure. It's a bit strange because Andres is a good friend, and he's just a very this is so weird. I feel like I'm eulogizing someone.
He's your buddy, yeah. He's your buddy, just what's he like when you're having beers with him?
He's just an incredibly compassionate, incredibly kind, and a incredibly sort of deep thinking person. This is sort of the whole. As an international observer coming to this election, you're lucky you have Denis here to give such piercing analysis of the campaign. Because if you're on the ground there, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this thing. It is
yes, you are. Absolutely.
Okay, it's just a shit show of like historic proportions. I mean, I walk around with my eyes bulging out of my head at the scale of the disorganization, at the malice of some of the people who are working on the election, at the disdain they have for those of us who are trying to bring international attention and transparency to this election. It's really one mess after another mess. I've referred to this as sort of democracy's death by 1,000 cuts. Denis has more succinctly called it fraud by incompetence. But in either case, what's amazing is just to see the ways in which just massive organizational failures create this room for tons of confusion, this cloud of confusion under which really sort of bad faith actors can operate, as in the case of Lenin Moreno shoving through central bank independence in between the first and second rounds of this election, which is just a stunningly authoritarian thing to do. So to bring it back to your question of who is Andrés Arauz, what's been amazing in the course of this is to see just the character assassination going after Andrés Arauz. I remember, so one of the things your viewers may not know is just how much of this election is happening on TikTok. I had no idea the scale of the power of this platform in Ecuadorian politics. And it's where most of the youth vote is being decided in 60 to 90 second videos of people, I guess, running around. I don't know what the fuck happens on TikTok. People running around their cars, doing dances. Jakub Perez has an extremely popular thing where he and his wife are like dancing around in their TikTok. I mean, and people love it. I mean, young people really, really love it. And Andres, is like, he's doing what he can on that platform, but he's a really cerebral guy. And what's amazing is his absence from that platform has people have taken it to mean that he's somehow he's slow or doesn't, he's just a kind of inheritor of, the dedazo, the kind of heavy finger of Rafael Correa to say this person's going to be, my guy, which couldn't be it couldn't be further from the truth. Andres is such a rigorous thinker. He's someone who's thought, I think, more deeply than almost anyone, certainly that I know, and maybe in the world, about this precise political economic sort of conjuncture that the country finds itself in. And in his work with CPER on the IMF, his work on dollarization, and he's extremely, really thoughtful and very nuanced thinking about where do we need to go from here? How can we arrange to have $1,000 given to, Ecuadorian families in need? How can we make that sort of left populist pink tide promise tractable given the economic circumstances where we find ourselves now? And he's not just doing that now. Andres is so rare because he's a young person who has the experience in government. The left has been locked out of government in so many places and for so long. We don't have people like Andres. We don't have people who were like, when they were 24, were governors at the central bank, right? Were ministers in the cabinet. We don't have those people. And he's such a treasure because he's able to say, look, I have the experience of being in government. I know what it's like to serve in these institutions. I've seen them from their inside. And I can tell you with honesty, with courage, and with compassion, this is what we're going to be able to do. This is what I can promise to do. And this is how I'm going to navigate it. And it's that credibility that I think it makes him such a powerful candidate. And it's why they're so scared. I mean, there's two ways to read this big giant mess. One is as a giant conspiracy, which I think, is sort of compelling. I think that there's good reason to think people have been planning a lot of this stuff for a long time. But much more compelling in my view is that they're really desperate and they're just throwing everything at the wall. And they're just, I'm sure we'll get into it now about the rumors about this loan that somehow Andres received from the guerrilleros of Colombia, they're just throwing nonsense at him because he's a clean candidate with an amazing record of standing up for the people of Ecuador. And I think that's what makes it so compelling.
And if I may add,
add away.
So I think really sort of the endurance of Andrés is really been on display throughout this campaign. As you know, David just mentioned this very important point of this attempt by the media in Ecuador, by the media in Argentina, by the media in Colombia to try to basically try to tie his campaign with the ELN, one of the guerrilla groups in Colombia, which has now actually evolved into an attempted intervention by the Colombian judicial system, by the Colombian Attorney General, who is also very good friends with the current president of Colombia, Iván Duque, in order to see if they can actually disqualify Andrés from the second round. So this and sort of Andrés's let's say endurance and resistance against this kind of political garbage has really been impressive against this and all of the other campaigns of intimidation, of trying to block his candidacy, of trying to intimidate him, of trying to throw in these false videos of him allegedly giving money to the voters so they vote for him.
Yeah,
and he has handled himself.
That's not a bad idea. We should do that more often. Yeah, we should just do that. I think that's not a bad idea.
Unfortunately, something the right wing does can do it better. But overall, this is something I believe that Andrés has held himself and has handled all of these attacks in a very in a very good manner. It shows that he, like Rafael Correa, would also be able to resist this once he's in government.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to look up an interview with Andrés Arauz and then look at him, hear him speak, and tell me that guy is in bed with like drug trafficking guerrillas. It's just like it doesn't pass the eyeball test in any sort of way. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Denis and David, thank you so much for joining me, talking about the situation in Ecuador. I think everyone on the left should be watching that election as it unfolds. Also, just in general, the left-wing movements in Latin America, always just a great a great source of inspiration for many of us, especially here in the U.S., where it just seems like we're so far out of power. Just to see actual countries in which the left contests for power is always very, very inspiring. Guys, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll have you back soon, I'm sure.
Thanks a lot, Nando.
Next time from Quito. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Nando.
All right.
Cheers.